We're going to talk today a little bit about character in baseball, and one of the things I asked you to write on was the great American pastime. And I asked you specifically, is baseball our great American pastime, or is it football? Because you wrote a paper in the fall on football, right? And you all talked about how important football was. Well, I have those papers, and I will give them to you later. But we're talking about this, and the assignment given to you was from A. Bartlett Giamatti, who was the former commissioner of baseball, in which he utilizes the whole notion of what baseball really is, and the notion of character. So when we talk about this thing about baseball, he said, romance is about putting things aright after some tragedy has put them asunder. It is about restoration of the right relations among things. So A. Bartlett Giamatti believed in this notion of character. In the papers that you were to write, I asked you about this thing about America's great pastime. And when we talk about this notion, it's kind of interesting. I got an email today from Earl Ziegler, who has probably written more books on sport and character than any human being alive. And I talked to you about him before. Remember, he's the 90-year-old guy who married a 35-year-old woman after he'd been married 70-some years to some other woman. And you all asked me how could that be, because he'd had to marry her about 16. Well, the truth is he did. He married his high school sweetheart in high school. Anyhow, he was talking to me about the social values and character values that we find in sport. And he argues that maybe the social values are what's destroying sport. Is it the social values that's making sport the problem? Well, if we look at baseball per se and the history of baseball, I don't want to quibble with Dr. Ziegler, but I think he's wrong. Because baseball is an old sport in the United States. And it came to us from an English game, probably. And its whole perspective of what it is about this relationship of competition to people and why we compete and the importance of it. Now, Ziegler also had a former student. His name is Bob Osterhout. And Bob is from Arizona, and he and Ziegler have written quite a bit on this. And they're saying that capitalism and commercialization is what's destroyed sport. Capitalization or corporatization or business has destroyed sport. And I don't think I agree. I think that the notion of competition has been with us for so long. I think there's something else going on in our social venue that's changing things. And this is a quote from him. He said, "This is truly what evoked the abandonment of moral prescriptions for sport, such as fair play, sportsmanship, honesty, and goodwill." You have written for me about 20 papers in this class. And in that period of time, most of you have defended to the death that sport builds character. These two men are saying that they think sportsmanship is not there anymore. But if we look at the integral nature of baseball to society, I think it still exists. I think sportsmanship is a very important part of what we see in sport. I was also intrigued by reading your papers that only a couple of you argued against baseball. And some of you talked about the majesty of the play, and Corey's not here, but he talked about going to a baseball game with his dad and about the green and the white and the beauty that's on the field. Most of you men in this class have played football, and some of you have played baseball, but there's something about baseball that makes it very different. So where did baseball come from? Is it truly an American game? Well, it may be, because we have other examples of games like baseball. Rounders, cricket. Gutsmuts was a German, maybe back in the 1796 and Knickerbocker rules. We're going to talk about those just a little bit. But it's an old game. So where did it begin? We started looking at some of these dates as far back as we could see in baseball contests in the United States. 1846, 1857. The first ball game we found in literature comes from 1085. This is, of course, in Europe. 1200 to 1300 in France. 1621. Now this made history because of something that occurred. This game was played on the most holy of all Christian holidays. Somebody was playing a game. And the governor of this state, of Plymouth Plantation, in Virginia, talked about seeing people playing baseball. None of you remember blue laws, but in this country, it used to be illegal to even sell anything on the Sabbath or on Christmas or to play games on those days. But in history, we can see these things occurring. At that time, it was thought that if you played baseball on these dates, like Christmas or on Sunday, you were being unchristian. So therefore, you had questionable character. Next slide. Baseball turns up again and again from the 1700s through, and notice that the fourth one down, it says based ball. And the faculty prohibits baseball on account of its being dangerous, as well as beneath the propriety of a gentleman. Now, you've all played baseball or softball, and you know how you use strategy to get an advantage, right? At that period of time, the same thing was going on, and the ideal was that gentlemen didn't play that way. You've also seen the movie Chariots of Fire, and the question about that as being a gentleman's game. So this activity of character in what Osterhout and Ziegler are arguing, I think is wrong. I think our nature and what we think about competition is part of the game itself, and the problem for us is how far do we push competition? What are we willing to do to get that advantage? And competition itself is problematic because we're always trying to get advantage, right? We're always trying to gain the advantage. And how do we do that within the nature of the rules without violating the rules? So that's our question.